Hi, this is Chris at Clever Unicorn Games and the Unicorn Collective. I'm back with another one of our interviews. Today I have Mike Nudd, designer, developer, author, and party DJ. How you doing, Mike?
Hi. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
What is it that Mike does when he isn't designing or making board games? What do you do with your spare time?
Well, I guess first of all, I'm actually balancing. I have a real job in the tech industry, so all my game stuff's done on a part-time basis. If I'm not spending that spare time on games, I guess I'm catching up on TV, watching movies. Yeah, I'm catching up with friends. Trying to do stuff around the house. So, the typical domestic chores are a big time suck too. I guess, yeah, not terribly
Most,
exciting, but
Mostly stuff in the house at the moment as well, I expect.
very much so, yeah. So all those, like, my partner's like, oh, all those things that you didn't do in the garden before, can you get them all done now? It's like, oh.
Oh, I know that. I know that. What is your favorite game? One favorite game?
Oh, that's tough. That's way too hard to pick out. Just one. It's like your favorite film or your favorite food. It's really hard just to go just that one. Um,
Highlander and Tikka Masala. See, there you go. I can do it.
but the games that are up there, I mean, I still rate Battlestar Galactica. It's probably one of the best games of all time. The old Fantasy Flight adaptation of the sci-fi show. A huge fan of the show. I'm really impressed with how they really encapsulated the theme of the show within the game. That paranoia sense of what's going on, who's on which side. And really allowing the players to argue in a sort of a constructive way. You've got just enough data maybe to try and work out what's going on if you really set up traps for people and so on. It's a really enjoyable game. So that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I had an experience with Battlestar. I only played it for the first time a couple of weeks ago and thoroughly
Mhm,
enjoyed it. But
mhm.
I was in a position where I was kind of handed a victory at the end because one of the other characters got Baltar and was
Right,
given the 2 Cylon cards at the beginning of the game. And then it
right,
came round to, 1 or 2 jumps before we got home. And
yeah,
because of his thing, he passed one to me and turned me into a Cylon like 2 jumps
yeah,
before the end. And then,
yeah.
I went around helping him destroy everything and, kind of handed the victory from all the groundwork he'd already laid. But yeah,
Yeah.
as a game, very, very impressed with it. And it's surprising because I've known people with the game for many years and never got around to playing it, so it was good to
Yeah.
sit down.
I'm not sure about all of the expansion content, like the alternative endings. I don't think any of them really work particularly well. But yeah, the core game, when we typically play with Pegasus and the extra characters, but probably not much of the rest of it.
Yeah, we just played vanilla because I'd never played before. He's got all the expansions, but we just played it vanilla that time. So I'm looking forward to playing it with Pegasus because people say that it is
Mm.
it's a needed expansion for it. It
Yeah,
adds a
yeah.
lot to the game. What kind of games inspired you to start making games? What like genre or theme of games made you think, oh, I want to make a game? Or is there a specific game that made you think, I want to make a game?
I'm not sure there was any one particular thing. I have to go all the way back to me as a teenager because I started. I got the fighting fantasy books, the old Ian Livingston things back when I was quite small, and the Warlock magazine that you used to be able to buy in the Newsagent, where it was like a choose your own adventure in a magazine, that sort of thing. My folks bought me the Red Box D&D role playing as a point of entry, and I didn't really understand it. I was still quite young and I couldn't quite make the sense of what's the difference between Constitution and hit points, and had nobody to explain it to me. But my mum at her work knew some war gamers, so for like old school historical war gamers. So she used to take us to the shows that they did. And I got inspired by wow, miniatures and all that kind of stuff. And ended up going to work for a Games Workshop as a part timer for a while in Southend, where I was based. And all those things were for just absorbing all those experiences and just but I started making my own like role playing campaigns pretty quickly, like D&D. Like let's an afternoon, let's just completely wing something, like just to go off on adventures, to writing my own material for some other role playing games. And all the way through university, I was a big advocate of gaming as a hobby. Generally, I ended up running the Game Society at the University of London for pretty much the whole time I was there. I met some of my key gaming buddies that I still game with now through that. And all the time, it's always, the brain was always ticking over as I was playing games. It's like, well, what about the next story? What about the next adventure? Or I didn't used to play board games that much, but when I did, it was always like, well, this is great. Well, what about if we did something here, did something with somewhere there? What about if you change the theme? And that the cogs are always turning in the background.
Yeah, and you touch on something very interesting there. I don't think we've spoke about in any of the interviews, and that is the the role playing games aspect of a lot of
Mm,
designers. I mean, a lot of designers did start with role playing games, and when you're writing a campaign or even an adventure for your friends, that is in a way kind of writing part of a game, because you have to
mhm.
think about what the interactions between your characters and how they're going to do it. And sometimes the rules might not be there, especially with the older versions of the role-playing games. The rules might not have been there for certain types of interaction, and you kind of have to make them up yourself, or you don't agree with some rules. I've had that in a role-playing game, and you
Yeah,
rewrite the rules so it's easier and more maybe a bit smoother for people to go with. So yeah, that
yeah.
comes into it a lot. Role-playing does affect how you think about writing these kind of things.
Mm. Well, particularly that nuance around how do you fairly represent the world that you're sharing, or the theme or the IP or whatever you want to call it. How do you make it feel like, for the benefit of the other players, that you're in this space, you're in this particular space? How do you make it feel like Star Wars, and how is that different from making it feel like Star Trek, um, or in D&D terms, like how is Forgotten Realms different from Dragonlance? How do you introduce motifs and like thematic things that descriptions that ground the players in this place and make it feel like a unique place. That's always been very important to me.
When you come up with a game, so you've got a game in your head, where do you start bringing that to the table?
I guess my process is it comes to the table when it's ready, which I guess is not a very helpful thing to articulate. But I'll have an idea, and it will stay in my head, and I'll keep turning it over and thinking about, well, so different sort of uh, different sort of play situations. How does this happen? How does that happen? What happens if this comes up? How do you deal with this problem? I'll deal with all of that internally. I'll just let it just keep turning it over until like ding, the light bulb goes off, and it's like, okay, so well, I think I've solved pretty much all those challenges, which now means it should be playable. So now I'll take the time to prototype it and spit it out, and try and get it in front of people.
Okay, so you must have a good memory for remembering those things as well, because I can't. With me, I kind of have to write things down straight away, or I will forget them.
Mm.
It's
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the detail. Yeah, I carry a little notebook around with me everywhere, so I'm making lists. Maybe I'll build a Google Doc or whatever as a reference point. Um, but actually, on a lot of cases, the detail, like what a card is called, or what combination of effects you get on a single card, that's not necessarily that important. It's more the sort of the high level challenges of what are the player objectives, how are you going to score points, if players are in conflict, how is that conflict resolved, how do you establish enough equity in like the different actions that go on within the game, um, those sorts of things. And once I've got a good grip on all that stuff, then those details should come out quite easily.
in your experience of bringing a game from your mind and then taking it to market, have you hit any hurdles or obstructions that you've had trouble with? They've stopped you dead, and then how did you overcome those obstacles?
I guess I don't know. I haven't had a great deal of challenges, but I guess that's symptomatic of the process that I use, because it's all in my head. Um, if I haven't solved that problem yet, then it's just still in my head, and I will just wait and it'll percolate and percolate until eventually it gets there. I guess maybe I'm a little bit lazy in that respect. I don't know the best way to phrase it, but yeah, I don't. I'm not sitting there with a hammer and the nut sort of going, I must crack this now. It's very much, well, I've got all these problems that I'll solve them when I solve them, because this is a spare time thing for me, and it's not income that I'm absolutely dependent on. There's not necessarily any rush, unless I'm actively contracted, engaged in a project which has given me a deadline, which changes things slightly. But um, so yeah, so when I'm prototyping, the game's pretty much fully formed, and a lot of those challenges are already out of the way, and it's much more about um, finessing and balancing, and sort of adjusting the theme, and that sort of thing. Probably the toughest challenge I've had to date is Modifius contracted me to do official Captain Scarlet license game because they've got access to all the Super Mario Nation licenses through that, because they already do Thunderbirds. They've actually got access to the rest of them. And the original plan was to try and get a game out for the anniversary of Captain Scarlet, which was like 2 years ago now, I think. And they'd had a game already, and it wasn't really working. And they asked me to come in and sort of have a look at the game that they had, and wasn't great. But having to try and deliver something else specifically to that brief of it needs to be co-op, it needs to be simple for families to play. But it also needs to be challenging enough for hobbyists to play. It needs to have the ability to add miniatures and things so they can go crazy on Kickstarter with it. And delivering to that very specific brief, I found quite hard. Because naturally I'll just pursue the projects that interest me. I guess if there's like 20 different problems that exist out there and I know how to solve 5 of them, I'm going to focus on the ones that I think I know how to solve and not spend a great deal of time on the ones that I haven't worked out yet. So
with Captain Scarlet, did you work with the rules that they already had and try and make them work better, or did you just start from scratch?
It was very much back to scratch, back to the basics, starting again. But it was trying to include some of the elements that they had before. There was a degree of hidden information that existed in the original game that they had that they wanted to try and preserve as well. So like the idea was to have some sort of AI a simple AI that would drive the player interaction with the game and with the board. With the idea would being that the Mysterons wouldn't be a player. The Mysterons would just be the game. You would be the Spectrum fighting against the Mysterons to try and actually and it was quite tough to make that work. And actually the solution was to come full circle. I said to them right at the beginning, this would be a more interesting game if it was semi-co-op like Battlestar Galactica. And actually that was the solution we found that broke that, that got us through that. Got us through to the end, which was actually let's have a hidden player who is actually working with the Mysterons, and that makes the game way more interesting than it was before. So,
do you get a little lamp with it as well, with the little rings, so you can put the rings everywhere? This is the voice of the Mysteron.
I don't know. I understand a lot of the artwork and sort of the visual design for the cards and things have all been done. They've been capturing stills from the show to use as artwork, but because it's sitting behind a number of other projects that the Modifius haven't closed yet, like Siege for the Citadel's been a huge, absolutely beast for them. They need to finish that before they start launching other projects. And now we've got into lockdown, and a lot of them have been furloughed. We're now waiting for everything to go back to normal for the game to see the light of day. So I think it'd be lucky to hit Kickstarter this year now, which is a shame, but hopefully eventually.
Have you ever played a game, and you don't have to name it, although some have, but yeah, probably best not to, that you really didn't like, and you were like, no, this is not for me? And what was it about that game, and maybe was it the theme or mechanic that really put you off it?
So Coaster Park, I think it's by Pandasaurus, is possibly the worst game I've ever played. It was absolutely dreadful. I don't know what they were thinking when they printed that game. I was just.
What is it about it that you didn't like? What is it that part really? Is it the whole game, or is there a certain thing?
When it first launched, and they took some copies to Essen. One of my friends picked up a copy, and we sat down, we played it during the show, and I was like, oh my god. And when I got home, I posted quite a scathing review of it on Board Game Geek, and I think upset some of those guys a little bit. But the principle of the game sounds fine on paper. The idea is you actually get loads of cardboard bits and you make up pieces. You actually like physical roller coaster pieces that stand up on the table. And the idea is you've got two bits of card like that with a little gap between them, and then you've got feet which kind of join them together and hold them together. And the idea is you roll a marble down that little gap, and the idea is you line up a load of these pieces and see how far your marble's going to get.
That sounds amazing. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, in principle, yeah. But the physics of it is when you line up these pieces and you just let the marble roll, there is not enough momentum to have that marble go beyond one piece. Basically, it's just simply not possible. So, in theory, there's an art to, well, if you flick your marble a bit harder, then maybe it will traverse one, maybe it will traverse two, and what have you. but but it's just absolutely impossible to do that in practice. When you set it up and try it, it's like, well, you need to be some weird dexterity savant to be able to make this work. And and one of the difficulties were in the printing of the game was when they made all the pieces, and like, you know, punch boards where you punch the pieces, the edges of the pieces aren't actually flat. They're kind of slightly beveled on one side where the machines come down. And what they did with the pieces is when you line up your piece, you've actually got both bevels are like that. So as soon as you try and flick your marble, it just goes it just goes like that.
Yep, that's something that could be fixed in design as well if they'd done it so that the
Yeah.
different sides printed different ways on the thing. But yeah,
So,
yeah.
so the physicality of the game didn't really work very well. I mean, it certainly wasn't fun to sit there and go, oh, I flicked it off again. Oh, I flicked it off again. Oh, it didn't go over the thing again. This is just not a fun experience. But then coupled to that was some sort of auction system. I mean, I can't even remember the details now because this is years ago. But there was like an economic part to the game where people would have to bid over the different pieces. And that didn't work either. There was just the mathematics of it it just didn't work. So it was like my friend who bought it. Well, okay,
We've got to try these things as well, though, and I bet there are.
Should I take it home or should I just stick it in the bin?
But that's the thing. I bet there are people out there that like it. It's one of those things with games, isn't it, where
Yeah,
you know, even though most people may say that a game is not very good, there's always going to be that small fan base where they'll say, no, this is the best thing ever. And it leads me back to one of those, you know, things about our games is that we have to understand that not everybody's going to like what we make. I mean,
and your tastes evolve as well. I mean, over time. I mean, one of the phenomenons that I think it's fair to say the industry right now is it's ballooned so massively in the last like 5 or 6 years or so, partly thanks to Kickstarter and the mainstream finally accepting the hobby. It's much more mainstream than it used to be. As you've got new people coming into the hobby that aren't necessarily that discerning. So if you can capture them, like if you're there, you can wave something shiny at them and go, like this, isn't this great? And you might sucker them the first time, but give them a couple of years and they've played a few other games and they've been watching podcasts or reviews or whatever, they'll start getting a better sense of it.
Why is it that you make games? What drives you to bring games to the table for people?
I guess it's mostly that intellectual exercise of like back to what we were saying earlier, like how do you treat the theme as best as you can? I mean, my day job is mostly about problem solving and communicating. So those are things I just like doing anyway. So the opportunity to to say take an IP or to take some world and explore that in a new way, and that hasn't been done before. And dealing with those problems, that's great. I'm mostly sort of driven by theme. That's usually my starting point. It's like if we take this human activity or we take this genre or what have you, what's the best way to represent doing this thing, doing this activity, and then going through the tool set of mechanics, combinations of ways to break that down mechanically.
What are you working on right now, games-wise?
So right now I am developing a new game for Alley Cat Games, sort of a spiritual sequel to Dice Hospital called Dice Theme Park.
Oh, no, that sounds interesting. And I'm guessing you're not allowed to say too much about it.
Yeah, I mean it's not my design originally. It's kind of a similar situation that happened with Dice Hospital. That Alley Cat signed a game by some other guys and has asked me to sort of give it a polish and make it actually so that it feels more like a spiritual sequel to Dice Hospital. But yeah, it's a slightly crunchier game, a slightly deeper game. There's a bit more to it decision making wise.
I do like the sound of it. I've always been a big fan of like roller coaster theme park games on PC and stuff. So anytime I see roller coasters, generally it's a definite have for me. Except for the one you've mentioned already, I'll not be running off to buy that one.
But yeah, the dice are people. You don't roll the dice. The pits sort of represent their excitement in the park, and then you're using that as a resource to be able to trigger different attractions to score based on where you put your guests, and there's some color color coordination, some yeah, and the ability to manipulate the pips on the dice to try and get the combinations that you need.
Which is the best use for dice, to be honest, because rolling them's rubbish.
Yeah,
Rolling
yeah,
dice, yeah, I hate rolling dice. Played a lot of Warhammer and stuff in my past, so I know that D6s are the bane of all existence. So yeah, I don't like rolling, but anytime you get dice and using them in a different way, like using them as markers, yeah, I always love that. Always a good way of using them.
hmm
What is, from your experience of making board games, what is the one piece of advice you would give to a new designer who's thinking about making a game? What would you say to them to encourage them to go through with it? What is one good piece of advice you would give them?
I don't know. I mean, because I still feel like I'm quite early on this journey. Like I've had a few game titles published, but I'm not like super well known, super successful yet. I'm not doing this full time yet. So I don't know. I have like the imposter syndrome where I'm not sure if I'm qualified to give advice to other people yet because I haven't struck gold yet necessarily. I don't know. Part of my philosophy though is to always do your research. I think it's really important that when you're setting out to do a project that you make sure you understand what else exists in the market, what else are people playing from a commercial perspective. It's all very well having your dream game and having tunnel vision of like my labor of love. I want to do this. I'm going to get it done. I want to get it out there. But if you don't, if it's like just another fantasy quest game, there's like hundreds that exist out there already. So why would why would people spend money on your game versus the other hundreds that already exist in the marketplace? What makes your game special? What makes it unique? What what can you say about the game that's going to inspire people to want to spend money on it? Um, so if you do a space game and say what other space games exist, if you're doing a worker placement game, what other worker placement games exist? I think it's really important for you to know what exists out there. And also because in case you accidentally copy something that somebody's already done, you don't realize that it's already been done as well. You can perhaps get some criticism accidentally by doing something the same. So just having some awareness of that as well, I think would certainly help.
Well, considering you didn't want to give advice, that is a great piece of advice. You know, researching and making sure that you know every other game out there that's going to do what
Yeah,
your game potentially will do. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah. I
that's
mean,
that's priceless to know because I think a lot of people don't realize that most successful designers are huge board gamers. You know, they've played hundreds of games, and that's how they get to get to the point where they know how games work and how good games that they like work, and then because there's very few original mechanics in games these days. It's very rare you'll see a game come out that has a unique mechanic because they've all been done. So it's a case of, you're seeing games that you've played before that you enjoy and you're trying to put your own spin onto mechanics that you've played, and you can only do
yeah,
that
yeah.
by playing the games.
But it's not necessarily a big step from that to be able to say, well, let's take these two things that have done before, but let's put them together in a way that hasn't, or actually, and if you combine a mechanical thing that maybe is perhaps so new, but you're treating a theme that's new, then that's probably enough. It's just about thinking where and from a more strategic perspective, you can if you can get those cogs turning, you can do that research. You can start going, well, so I can see gaps here. I can see things that people haven't done, and then let's focus in on those because then you're maximizing your chances of maybe a publisher being interested in that game. That combination of things because you can see they haven't been done, and if you can bring that research with you into your conversations and say, well, I've looked, I can reference these things here, but what I've done here doesn't exist yet. This is why you should take my game. That's giving you a much better chance of it getting picked up.
Well, Mike, thank you very much for coming and speaking to me today. This has been brilliant and eye-opening, and I wish you all the best with your future projects.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for your time.